as world leaders continue with their talks at COP29 in Azerbaijan, negotiators are agreeing that substantial funding is needed to help lower-income countries adapt to climate change. The Minister of Environment here at home, that's Dr. Dion George, is leading the South African delegation at that summit. Also watching those talks is SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko, who joins us once again from Baku in Azerbaijan. And Samkele, because of just how mammoth a task this is, it's important, I suppose, to think of ways in which we can start having discussions that allow us to have clear takeaways, tangible takeaways, as it were. Are you finding that there's something to hold on to as we wait for those talks to start there?
Well, at this point in time, it's not yet clear whether there is something to hold on to, because it would be very premature at this stage to say what some of the outcomes of these deliberations that has been dubbed the Finance COP will come out with. But I'm going to bring in Mr. Inos Mbodi, who is a Labour Commissioner in the Presidential Climate Commission of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Mr. Mbodi, just the essence of these deliberations, what can South Africans look forward to that will come out of this COP that has been dubbed the Finance COP, particularly when it comes to the $1.5 trillion that is needed in order to mitigate through these challenging times of climate change?
Yeah, thank you so very much. We think what we need is not loans. I think the discussion should go to a point where we don't get to finance this human calamity called climate change using loans. We believe that grants are the vehicle that can be used, and we believe that should be the vehicle that should be used, because we have got a debt to GDP ratio which doesn't allow us to keep on getting the loan. It doesn't matter how cheap that loan looks like. We still have got to pay the capital amount back, and it is our view that these monies should come in the form of grants. We believe the quantum that is being banded around looks good enough, but it can even be more, but as long as it is not loans. We believe that with loans, there are conditionalities that we don't get to know of, and that helps our perceptive minds to doubt exactly what we're receiving the money for. And I think as Labour, if these things are not clearly outlined and we do not know the conditionalities of these loans, even though I say we don't want loans, there are loans that have already been received whose conditionalities are not known. That helps our perceptive minds to doubt what exactly are we receiving these monies for. If we can know the quantum and if we can know what to pay back, why can't we know the conditionalities?
On the Labour front, looking at Komati Power Station, what happened at Komati, go to Forestry, what happened at Forestry, is the labour force in South Africa and also in the automotive sector. If you don't have less emissions and carbonize, you're effectively going to have problems within that automotive sector. South Africa will lose that market that it currently has. On the other side, coal side, labor intensive, largely dense with South African workforce there. If you close those coal power stations and don't repurpose them, don't reskill that labor force, more unemployment.
Yes, that's why we believe that replanning of the economy or diversification of the economy is very key in this regard. It shouldn't be done as an afterthought. It should be done well in advance, because it is known that if you disinvest from a certain economic activity, you should at least have established something that keeps the community going, or else you'll be left with a ghost town. So if I can go to the issues of automobile sector, I will tell you something. The issue of CBAM gets to threaten our peace, because what happens with CBAM, we get to move at the pace determined by others. It is no longer a sovereignty-driven just transition, but they give us the pace. And obviously, I'm sure they are happy that they're giving us the money and the pace, but that takes from us the justice part on our side. We wouldn't want to lose any jobs. We want everything to be done in such a way that we preserve jobs, and we do not rush this at the call of other people. Let me just make an example of your petrol attendants. We probably would lose about 100,000 of them, but to where? We should be knowing the pathways by now Nobody knows. We are busy second-guessing, all of us. And also let me mention your informal sector, like the so-called bush mechanics. What is to happen to them? Because this NAV is new, it's not something that we know of. These are people who are eking out a living, fixing our cars. What is to happen to them? All those things need to be considered to the finer detail. And right now we are not convinced that is the case.
Is government clear on how many jobs will be lost in the formal and informal sector with this just transition?
I can tell you there are numbers that get bandied around, and I'm telling you it is not clear what is the net loss or what is the net gain. The issue is you've got the jobs for the future, for which you need to have skills. So it is upskilling, reskilling, and skilling. But, you need to know what are the jobs that we are losing versus what we are receiving. If at all, then you are going to know if it is a net loss or if it's a net gain. But I can tell you from what we know, if you close a power station and you open a solar power station, you are not going to have as much people there. So if you close, like the Komati was closed, there is no way any solar power station can be able to give you the same numbers. It's impossible.
Your friends in business seem to think just transition is the way to go.
Yes, we think just transition is the way to go, but the pace at which we do this should not be determined by other people. We should strengthen social dialogue institutions, make sure that we have got very, very solid outcome. For instance, in your NDCs, for instance, we need to have a locally credible NDC, which means if we all agree that this helps us not to deepen the crisis we already have, then we can go ahead. But it can't be at the pace determined by other people other than ourselves. And the quality thereof of the just transition is not to be given by any outsider, but by ourselves. As they say, you can't cook a meal and praise yourself for it. It has to be us who would say, yeah, this meal is tasty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mbodi. That is Mr. Innocent Mbodi, who is a commissioner, Labour commissioner in the Presidential Climate Commission. I'm going to bring in Mr. Rest Nkunja from Indalo. Mr. Nkunja? Kanjo. Apologies. Mr. Kanjo, the essence of this COP, finance COP, but is the labour force, is communities in South Africa being taken on board in the just transition debate and looking at the changing geopolitics around the world at this point in time?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Samkele. I think at the core of this thing, we should just understand that there's a transition that's happening and it's a process. And the next thing that we then need to understand is the justice part, right? And you're asking a question whether communities are being taken into consideration in the process. The answer is that yes and maybe no, but the reality is the justice component needs to come quite strong. So the work that we do, and I think the work that South Africa has been trying to do, having taken the lead in most of these processes, especially from the African content perspective, it's critical that those issues of procedural justice, for example, distributive justice and restorative justice, are actually at the core of this work. So what we mean by that is that when we say there should be engagement, we're not talking information sharing, we're not talking just a consultation. It's a process of joint collaboration where communities, private sector, government come together and actually co-create innovations that actually are going to lead to a transition that is indeed just. The previous speaker, Mr. Mbodi, really talks quite well about the effects of this transition in terms of the labor force in South Africa, but also in terms of the broader communities. So it's critical that a lot of investment is put into building local institutions and strengthening those institutions. And it's important also that we look at how long that investment should be. And I do agree that it should not necessarily be grants, loans. The processes of building those institutions should be, invested in pension money. It's money that should be grants, and we should invest quite a lot in that. We also need to recognize that we come from a low base, as a country within the African context. And when we do that, our journey and our work is a lot bigger than any Western or European country that we are engaging with in these processes. So yes, there is work that is being done. The PCC is doing a lot of work, and I think we should recognize that. But when you do work, the reality is that there's going to be mistakes, and mistakes are fine as long as we learn from them. And I think we are learning quite a lot from these processes. We're learning from Komati, and I don't know if people do understand and know that government has acknowledged, the PCC acknowledged, committees have acknowledged that things have not gone right, maybe, but the reality is that there's an opportunity to fix. And what are we doing? Are we taking each other along in that process? Are we actually investing enough money in that process so that these situations are fixed? We're looking at the work that we've done in Indalo and supported by a number of organizations in the Paliseng, local municipality, for example. There's a lot of lessons that we've actually taken from that process. And one of those key lessons is actually a locally driven transition. Whether we like it or not, communities have begun to say, we can do certain things ourselves, and that's critical, and that's what we want to see. So when the world gathers in this platform, hello, we have to say, where's the money for consultations, where's the money for engagements, where's the money for investing in building social infrastructure and local institutions.
But will the developed countries bring in those much resources to developing countries in order to have those consultations, in order to engage these communities in this just transition? When you look at how unjust this just transition was to Grootvlei, to Komati?
The answer is that we're beginning to see some of that coming through. I think we need to, it's all good and nice to shout to the top of the roof and say there's no money coming in. But the reality is that there is some money coming in. Our own government is putting a lot of money in that process, Is it enough? Maybe not. Maybe it's not enough. And I do agree that maybe that is not enough. But there is some legway, that we've kind of covered. And let's build upon that. The biggest mistake we'll make is, for example, come in and go out because donor time frames, dictate that it's a 2-year or 3-year project. That's the biggest mistake we'll make. I think the commitment must be a way long term. I mean, other European countries have actually experienced some forms of transitions in the past, and that has taken decades, 70 years, some of them, in those situations, the issues of injustice in transitions, we're not the first ones to experience it. A lot of people, the UK has experienced an unjust transition. Am I excusing what is happening now? No. It's important that a lot of investment is made. And anyway, we're an African country, we're a developing country, and we need a lot of support. I mean, fact is, we are not the #1 contributor in terms of emissions. It's fact, and all over the world accept that. Do we see the need for transition? Labor unions themselves will tell you that we do a need for transition. I mean, the word just transition is a word that was coined and pushed quite strongly by the labor and organized labor movement. And we should support labor around that kind of stuff. And let's put in more money for the workers, because if we don't do that, we're actually left with ghost towns, as my colleague has said. We're left with communities that are left in destitute. We can't afford that as a country, with unemployment rates that are very high. We can't afford that.
In 30 seconds, is business coming to the fore in engaging communities, in making sure that no one is left behind in this decarbonization and just transition?
So we're standing here in front of the South African pavilion, and if you look into the pavilion, you would actually notice quite immediately that it's actually a partnership between NBI, the National Business Initiative, and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and the South African government. And you would notice quickly that there's a lot of corporates that are here, have supported this process. And I must actually encourage everybody to look at the agenda for these 2 weeks that we've been here in this pavilion. The central message in everything that we've been talking about here is the message of just transition, funded by corporates in South Africa. And in fact, a lot of corporates in South Africa are beginning to engage within that space. As in Indalo, we're working with a number of those organizations, Nedbank, for example, as a partner. And it's a strong partner within this space. And we're funding projects across the country. And it's important that we're actually able to do that, as corporate South Africa. Well, I don't represent corporate, but we're beginning to see that. Can they do more? Yes, they must do more. I mean, we're speaking earlier here, and one of the things that I said in the panel is that if corporates are just doing this just for the sake of CSI and greenwashing and that type of stuff, we're doing injustice. Yeah, they're doing injustice to themselves as businesses. That's not responsible business practice, because you come out and pull out of that process very quickly, that everything that you've invested in collapses. So commitment must be long-term, and it is important that corporates come on board quite strongly in that.
Thank you very much for your time. That is Mr. Rest, who comes from Indalo, who are saying that South African business is coming to the fore. This pavilion is essentially funded by the department and funded by the National Business Initiative that is looking into South Africa's just transition and the decarbonization. Particularly when you look at the business sector, they have said that if South Africa does not decarbonize, it will have a problem and will lose its market within the automotive sector. But there is also the informal economy, your bush mechanics, you go toward your petrol attendants, which are part of the formal economy as well. On the other side of coal, you've got a labor-intensive and labor-driven economy within the coal belt within the country, that if you just close down coal-powered stations without repurposing them, without reskilling and reskilling the workforce, those people will all be lost to the economy and further perpetuate unemployment, poverty and inequality within the country. The developed nations are in it for a battle against the developing countries, who are saying that the $100 billion that was promised by these developed nations has not yet come to the fore. About $1.5 trillion is also needed in order to make sure that this just transition takes place adequately and brings along the entire population of the world and the various countries and communities that it is taking place in.
Absolutely, and of course the question is still, where will that money come from? Samkele Maseko live to us there from Baku in Azerbaijan. For now, thanks very much indeed. We'll certainly keep watching COP29 as it enters its second week for you throughout the course of the coming days.